Number one key success factor for a business process management activity, no matter if you're talking a full program or a single project, comes down to leadership, because even leadership influences culture.
Welcome to Process Pioneers, the show that takes a deep dive into the minds of decision makers, key influencers, and process experts who are pioneering the world of everything process.
Welcome to another episode of Process Pioneers. My name is Daniel Rayner and I'm the host of Process Pioneers. And in each of these episodes, I get the absolute privilege of sitting down with different process practitioners, process professionals, anyone that falls under the category or the banner of process. And we all know that the process world, it's very diverse. There are many new technologies, there are many different methodologies. And, I learn a lot in each of these conversations, and I hope you are too. So if you've got a notepad and pen, please bring it out, because I know you're going to learn a lot from today's conversation. I've got the absolute pleasure of sitting down with Stephanie Naidoo. Now, Stephanie is the CEO of Blue Crane Consulting Group, and we're going to dive into what that is and what she does. So I'm really excited for this conversation. Stephanie, thanks for joining me.
Thank you for inviting me, Daniel. It's a pleasure to be here.
So what we might do to begin with is if you can give our audience a bit more context for who you are and what you do, and maybe take us all the way back to when you were first introduced to the idea of process, and then take us on a journey leading up to today.
Hi, Daniel. Thank you so much for having me, and I'd love to address that question. I am a Lean Six Sigma Master Black Belt. I have been doing Lean Six Sigma and process improvement for most of my career. Mm-hmm. I started many moons ago when GE still had the Lean Six Sigma program in place that had been created by Jack Welch. Mm-hmm. And during those days, every new employee at GE was expected to complete their Green Belt certification within 6 months of joining the company, or they might not be a new employee. Singing off the same hymn sheet. We spoke the same language, we were using the same tools, and everyone had a consistent understanding of what process meant and what process was.
Right.
As part of the program, I learned about how to create a process, understand a baseline, implement the improvement. What I didn't realize was that as part of that education, I was also learning business process management, because General Electric expected every new process project to fit into their BPM structure. So I was learning what a level 0, level 1, level 2 process was. Right. I was learning BPM standard language, standard methodologies. It was just part and parcel of everything else that we were doing. So to me, that has shaped my career. My entire career, I've never really seen a difference between process improvement and process management. It's really only been over the past few years, as I was doing work with Commonwealth Bank and with other organizations, that I started to pull them apart and recognize that process management and process improvement were two separate methodologies, approaches, and languages. But what I felt was also very important was to never lose that connection, because they need to work together. You can only get so far with one before you really need to make sure that you're paying attention to the other. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's great. And I think that's an interesting point there about working at, back at GE, where it was mandated enterprise wide. I think that's a huge point for organizations or for people that are listening to this conversation to take on board that, a culture is huge. Culture is a big part of process management and process improvement. And if everyone's on the same page, is thinking along the same wavelengths and they're talking the same language, that goes a long way in making sure BPM is adopted effectively.
100%. What's the saying? Culture eats strategy for breakfast. It's so true. Culture is the number one success factor in any transformation program, regardless of whether you're talking about process or digitization or human resources or operations. It always comes down to culture. And if you don't understand your culture, you're not going to realize success. I will also say that this particular example, GE, is definitely the most advanced and the most mature BPM organization I have worked in my career.
Mm.
And so that widespread, everybody must speak the same language, that took years and edicts and a lot of investment and a lot of very strong-willed leadership approach to reach that destination. To me, it's more about starting the journey and working your way through it until you can reach a certain level of maturity. It doesn't matter what level you're starting at, whether it's a team of people that want to understand their process, whether it's an entire organization that won't embark on a improvement project unless they understand where it fits into their structured model. Doesn't matter where you are, there's always an opportunity to grow and improve.
Yeah, definitely. And for those that are listening to this, that maybe they haven't had the privilege of working in such a process-centric organization and learn internally, for, like, what does it look like? And there are a few people coming to mind right now where in an organization of a few thousand people, they're the only person that's been labeled process design lead or something like that. And they haven't come from a process background or anything like that. It's very new for them and they've been given this huge task. But I guess for that person that they're just starting out on their BPM journey, what are some of those key ingredients, apart from, I guess, getting that culture right? What are some of the other key ingredients an organization needs to consider?
That's a beautiful question. And in reality, you're talking about the majority of the people out there who are considering BPM.
Right.
You don't have a lot of organizations that have a high level of maturity. And the small organizations don't really, when you have few enough people, you don't really need a high level of maturity yet. Right. So that your example is, that's 90% of them. That's 95% of them.
Right.
Where would I start? I would start with understand your upstream and your downstream processes and really understand how much buy-in you have from your leadership.
Right.
The number one key success factor for a business process management activity, no matter if you're talking a full program or a single project, comes down to leadership. Because even leadership influences culture. So they come together. I would say, understand, do you have a strong leadership? Do you have a sponsor? If not, find one. Get somebody on board. Have the coffee conversations. Make sure they understand what they're achieving. Don't sell them on the long-term vision. Sell them on what the immediate benefits are going to be and why they would want to buy into this from an organizational standpoint, but also from a team and a people capability uplift standpoint. Get your leadership right. If you don't have leadership, if that leadership doesn't have longevity, you're going to struggle.
Yeah. I think that's a great point. Finding that key person, who can you catch up with, who can you sit down with, and how can you speak their language? How can you talk about BPM, not from that technical perspective, because they won't care about that. They won't understand that. They're going to want to know, how does it tie into the strategy or the direction or the overall, vision of the business, the things, I guess, that the executive level, that's where they spend their time. And so if you're not speaking that language, that coffee conversation is going to be very short if you're not resonating with what they're thinking about.
Yeah, absolutely. Kill the acronyms. The acronyms will baffle anyone. They even, sometimes you'll hear an acronym and you'll say, wait, are you talking about this meaning for that acronym or that meaning for that acronym? So again, kill them completely and understand how that particular stakeholder's success is measured. So what is their annual review based on? Are they, and how can you structure the success of the work that you're doing to help them understand how their goals will be realized? Yes,
that's great. And for, I guess, in talking with that executive level leadership, as you were saying there, then don't try and pitch the long-term plan, but what are some short, quick sort of wins that you can communicate to them? Do you have any examples that you've experienced where an organization has adopted or implemented BPM, or even just improved or tweaked one process and it's delivered significant value to the organization? Do you have any examples that you could share with us today?
Actually, if it's okay, I'd like to pull an example from something that's not a corporation. You probably get a lot of examples from corporations.
Yeah,
This is
great.
from one of our clients that is a university.
Yep,
Actually.
great.
This particular university was looking at understanding the level of compliance for medical students. So medical students have to have certain health checks, background checks, before they can begin their education.
Right.
Right. So the percentage of students that had this certification by the due date wasn't high enough. Because in reality, if it's not 100%, it's not high enough.
Yes.
So we were working with them to understand what was causing the gap. And we took the process and we wanted to understand, okay, what part of the process is falling down? Again, we said, well, what's the high level process? Where do we fall? What is the area that we need to be improving? And again, I'm coming back to process management, process improvement. We realized that the process that they were managing was from the point that the students started the compliance process until the point when the students reached their compliance. So we're looking at how do you improve and streamline a student getting their jabs, getting their police check, doing whatever else is required. We were looking at the wrong part of the process.
Right.
It wasn't how long it takes a student to complete that process. So of course, that needed the management and improvement. What we really needed to look at, and this is what we realized from talking to students, analyzing where the breakdowns were, really getting into both data and process mapping, we realized that it was falling down when the students were hearing about the process. So what was their initial interaction? So rather than saying, okay, well, they started classes, we need to get them to have the medical, the injections, the vaccinations and everything. They're registering for classes. Oh, wait, they're attending orientation open day.
Right.
They're interested in the degree and might come to this university.
Right.
So by understanding that we weren't just looking at this part, but we were looking at this part of the process, we were able to improve the level of compliance threefold.
Yes, right. Wow.
And that was within a single semester. So we're not talking about then once they started to manage the different parts, they managed the communication, they managed the quality of the information that was reaching the students, and then they also managed the implementation end to end. They were looking at the right part of the process, and that helped them to reach a higher level of compliance. The same methodology, the same idea applies with customers.
Right, right.
You know, we love to say, oh, what's the customer experience? But a lot of companies think about the customer from the point that they walk in the doors. They don't think about the time when the customer is exposed to the brand, to other people's opinions, et cetera, et cetera. So if you're only looking at process for the operations side of it, you're missing a point. You need to look at the right part. And that again comes back to what we said earlier. When you have one person who's trying to do one process improvement, do you have influence of the entire process flow, the entire stream, or do you really only have an opportunity to improve your operations? And if you only have an opportunity to improve your operations, you can achieve a lot.
Yes.
You just might not achieve everything that you're capable of.
Yes, yes. Right. I think that's a huge point about, the value in understanding the business end to end, cross-functionally, when you're working with your customers or the students or the end stakeholders, understanding, well, what is the full journey that they go on? Because that journey may cross in and through many different departments. And if you're not understanding that full picture, you might be deploying resources in one area where it really should be deployed over here, and if you don't understand what is in terms of the process, what's upstream, what's downstream, if you're making a change here, but you don't understand how that impacts either way, then you might be shooting yourself in the foot, so to speak.
Absolutely. And that comes back to my point that I made when we were chatting before we started our conversation today. And that is that it's not just BPM and process management. It's not just process improvement. But you, my friend, have been talking about design thinking and human-centered design.
Right.
And in reality, there is no one skill set. These skill sets tie together. They build on each other. And the more you can translate between the different languages, the more you're going to be able to give higher value to whoever your customers are, whether they're people who are spending money on your service or product, whether they're students attending classes at your university, whether they're the stakeholders and the shareholders of the corporation. Doesn't matter who they are. You really, the more skills, the more toolkits you have, the better prepared you are for solving the problems that you're facing.
Yes, yes, that's great. And when we're talking about buy-in, generally we're talking about buy-in or sponsorship from that executive level. But talk to me about getting buy-in from the process practitioners or the frontline employees, the ones that are actually carrying out the process. And if you are going to make changes to the process, they're the ones that are going to be carrying out the changes.
100%.
And you know, if you don't have that buy-in, if they're not on board with it, you might face some resistance there, especially if they've been doing that task for the last 5, 10, 15, 20 years. You know, it isn't as easy as walking, or it's not as straightforward as coming in being like, do this, and they do it. You need to bring them along for the journey. So talk to us a bit about that.
Oh, the best way to make sure that a change is going to fail is to go in and tell people how to do their job, especially when they've been doing it for 10 or 15 years. The best way to make sure that a change will succeed is by listening to those people. Right. I start every engagement with gaining an understanding of what those people who are facing the customer need. So customer experience is two things. It's the customer themselves. Obviously, there's a ton of value in speaking to your customer. However, that one customer only had their own experiences. That frontline staff, especially if they're clued in, they have had every experience of every customer that they have come into contact with over the years.
Right. Yeah.
So one of the big benefits of the whole concept of operational excellence culture, one of our tenets is the process, not people. So when you start talking to those frontline staff, the people who are doing the doing, in a way that doesn't say, oh, well, did this person do that? Did that person do it wrong? How does this other person always mess it up? Instead, if you go in and you say, we're trying to understand the process, we're not pointing fingers at any people, we're not trying to create more work for you. In fact, we're trying to reduce the non-value add work. There are other ways to say that, but in reality, we're trying to reduce the work that you do that's busy work. Yeah. And we're trying to allow you problem and in really adding value to the customer experience. So the more you're willing to listen and have the conversations from the right approach, the higher success rate you're going to have.
Yes, that's great. And I think the people in those positions, that they are in the best positions to identify, well, what are the pain points? What are the problems? And how can we improve things? And, you know, if by creating a culture that gives them the space to put forward their own suggestions and ideas and things like that. Maybe they don't have the greatest suggestions to begin with, but maybe they do. But I think that, you know, the more input you can get from them, the better the chance of coming up with the right solution.
The best ideas I have ever had when working as a consultant have come from listening to the employees who are doing the doing. Listening, giving them value. Obviously, never take credit for their ideas, but listening to what they have to say and feeding it back to them. And then sometimes you have to translate into a way that executive management will hear it. Those ideas are seriously, the best ideas come from your front line.
That's great. And there's this topic that I've been sort of mulling over the last few weeks about this idea of being a reactive organization compared to a proactive organization. And when we're talking about process, I think, you know, my thoughts have been sparked by other conversations I've had, and I guess talking about process in terms of like whether the organization is putting out fires or focusing on pain points or problems, compared to spending time creating the future, you know, being quite proactive with, well, where are we taking this organization? How are we creating the future? How do we think the future needs to look like or can look like? Every time I talk about, I guess that challenge between that difference, or that conversation around being reactive or proactive. I think of when I was first introduced to the iPhone, like when someone first showed me the iPhone, did I have a pain or a problem or something that I really needed solving? I didn't feel like I did. Like I saw this new technology and I was like, never needed it before. Why would I need it now? But ever since I was introduced to it and I saw the value and I saw, I guess, a better way of, the future, so to speak, I can see how much value it's brought to my life by being able to stay in touch with people and communicate and plan and schedule and all of these different things that our phones give us. But when we're talking about it from an organizational point of view regarding process, creating that future, as opposed to focusing on the fires and the pain points and the problems, how do you manage that tension?
I am going to change your words a little bit, Daniel.
Great.
You're talking about a reactive organization versus a proactive organization. I would argue that your reactive organization is focusing on their costs.
Right.
And your proactive organization is focusing on their revenue.
Right.
So if you flip your thinking a little bit and you think about it that way, your reactive organization is really just trying to manage the costs, fight the fires, and handle what's going on.
Right.
The proactive organization saying, how can we grow? How can we go out and reach new customers? What's the new market? What's the next opportunity?
Yes, right.
It's one of my favorite flips of thinking that I've encountered. So thank you for giving me an opportunity to share it. Now back to your genuine question, which was, how do I manage the tension between them? I often go back to, what are your measures of success?
Right.
So when I'm talking at least when I'm talking at the executive level, I will sit down with the executives and I will say, great, let's see what our KPIs are. What are we trying to do this year? And how much of our KPIs is focused on manage these costs, manage this, find this savings, head count, and how much of what you're focused on this year is grow the business, find the new opportunity. In a similar way, continuous improvement and innovation often get treated differently. Continuous improvement, people look at it and say, oh, that's a cost exercise. Innovation programs, oh, that's a revenue opportunity exercise. Different language, same thing. They really come together. Again, flip sides, they work together, same approach, same methodology. It's about changing what people are focused on as the measure of success. Are you focusing people on saving money? Or are you focusing them on net EBITDA? So what's your net operating profit to the organization? Looking at revenue as well. And the two balance out a lot better.
Right. And I guess that would be helpful when understanding, well, what are the critical processes we want to be focusing on to begin with? Because there'll be a lot of people listening to this, as we mentioned earlier in the conversation, that there are a lot of organizations that are either yet to embark on their BPM journey or just starting now. And when we're talking about getting those small wins, those quick wins, those wins to prove the value in it, that they're going to be wanting to identify, well, what are the critical processes to be able to show this value, to be able to prove this value. And so I guess understanding your KPIs and what you're trying to achieve, that will help you narrow your focus down. Which processes should we focus on to begin with?
Absolutely. Which processes should we focus on based on our KPIs, and which processes should we focus on based on our opportunities? So if you map your KPIs to those processes, you're going to see that there's opportunity in this one. There might not be opportunity in that one. In some cases, that means exit processes.
Right.
So I've worked with organizations that are looking at, and maybe it's just their product lineup, or maybe it's their service offering. Sometimes you just need to choose to exit that process, whether that means you just stop offering it, whether that means you outsource it. Even if you outsource it to that organization down the street, I'm not saying that you need to be looking at, any major exercise. But when it comes down to it, do the things that are going to be the highest value add to your organization. Focus on those. Start there.
Yeah. That's great. And one question I wanted to ask around, because I think there are a lot of different methodologies out there, and some people can be very strong about, like, I'm in this camp. I only do agile. I only do lean. I only do BPM. But talk to us about, how do they complement one another? How do they complement one another? And what's your perspective on that?
100%. They all complement each other. When you come down to it, they're all using the same ingredients. It's the same, it's just a slightly different recipe.
Right.
Every single one of these things talks customer first. Sometimes it's the implementation of it that might not. When it comes down to it, every single one of these methodologies is customer first. Every single one of these methodologies says where are the opportunities. Every single one of these methodologies does look at process in one way or another. Everything is implemented, everything is impacted by culture. Everything, the success factor always falls to, do you have the right leadership to support and to encourage and to allow this to grow? I've made it one of my career goals to bring these different methodologies together, to have people talking to each other, shaking hands when we're allowed to again, and saying, wait, I see how we speak the same language. We speak the same language. We might use different words. We're talking about the same thing.
Yes.
We talk about agile culture. Agile culture is very exciting right now. And before agile culture was exciting, lean culture was very exciting. And before lean culture was very exciting, something else is very exciting. And after agile culture is very exciting, we'll have something else come out. In fact, I'm predicting probably within the next couple of years, we're going to see a new culture model, and everyone's going to start jumping on that wagon.
Right.
So again, we're all speaking different. We're actually speaking the same language. It all comes down to operational excellence. How do you take an organization, ideas and people, systems, and make them all work together in a better way to deliver a better outcome for your customer?
Yeah.
That's the simplicity of it.
That's great. That's really cool. And I guess now that you've sort of mentioned or talking about the future and what you think the future will look like, let's dive into that, because I think it's very interesting what the next 2, 3, 5 years is going to look like. I think, this even just this last year, it's been a very turbulent year. It's been a year that has fast tracked a lot of things by 10, 15 years. It's really disrupted a lot of organizations. And for those organizations that have been more prepared than others, it's what's the phrase? It's pressure tested everything that they've put in place. Understanding their business processes, having the documentation there, having improvement in place, having their processes linked to strategy. But I guess, well, before we jump into the future, what has the last year looked like, and how has BPM played a role in that?
Oh, wow. What has the last year looked like? Unfortunately, I haven't been able to sit at any of my clients' offices for a long enough period to be able to look over their shoulders and see what the last year has looked like. No, in reality, the last year has shown us which processes were flowing because the process was stable, and which processes were flowing because you had a couple of firefighters who were absolutely excellent at holding the strings together, people who were making things continue to work. And the second that this disruption started, I think that's when you started to see which processes were working and which processes were being held together in a way that was not sustainable. And you think about websites crashing, you think about deliveries taking extra weeks. Those are examples of processes that were being held together in a way that was not sustainable. So I see the world that we look at, that we're in today, I see it as an opportunity. I mean, in the business space, there's huge opportunity to take all the disruption that's happening and learn from it, not just what's happening in your competitor's organization, but how have hospitals had to completely change the way that they operate to be successful in this world? What other organizations? I'm trying not to name any names, but one of the major travel agencies went out and they proactively made decisions that allowed them to sustain their organization through all of this disruption, which allowed them to see the other side of what we hope was the worst of it. So there's a lot of opportunity to learn. There's a lot of opportunity to revisit. You also have a lot of organizations that are now doing cost-cutting exercises. If they do that in a managed way, they may find opportunities to keep their current cost basis and experience growth when the economy starts to come back. Right. Alternately, they may find cost savings in benefits and process, systems and such that no one was actually using. And being forced to work from home for so many people has resulted in changing the way they look at their day-to-day lives, but it's also required them to think innovatively. Yes. So I think there's a lot of opportunity to come. There might be some nuggets of gold in there, hopefully. Yep. Yeah, definitely. I'm very excited to see what this year will bring. I think that our renewed focus on using technology not as a way to distance ourselves from people, but actually as a way to connect with people, I think that's a huge opportunity. Yeah. And I think that's one of the areas that we need to focus is how do we use technology to better our lives rather than just using technology to be a little bit more efficient, but in reality, just adding a bit of clutter and noise. Yeah, definitely. And I do think organizations need to be aware of, what's their baseline, what's their starting point as new technology comes out and as it's developed. And, we've got things like robotic process automation and process mining and these types of technology that are quite popular at the moment. And I guess one risk there for organizations is that they jump on these technologies without having foundations in place. And so coming back to where are we at as an organization? Let's not look at our competitors and be fearful or have that fear of missing out, but let's understand where are we at and what's our next best step moving forward. Yeah, absolutely. Oh, listen, if your organization, if you've managed to get a huge momentum behind the concept of RPA, robotics and process automation. I just said earlier, no acronyms. You've gotten your organization heavily behind this new program. We're going to automate out as many processes as we can. It's going to free up people so they can focus on the human value add work. Beautiful. You've got momentum. You've got support. You've got budget. Use that as a way to also revisit your fundamentals. Right. I'm very much a come back to fundamentals kind of person. When you start to speak the fundamentals, you're all speaking the same language. That does not mean that a process intelligence program in your organization isn't the way to go. It means that process intelligence program needs to be informed by processes and by intelligence. Yes. Not just by software package, drop it in and expect things to be fixed. That's not a recipe for success. Yeah, definitely. And I guess for those organizations, for the people that are listening right now, as we move into the future, and every organization will be at a different BPM maturity level, whether their their processes are documented or whether they're not. What are some of the key areas that you feel like organizations need to be focusing on in the near future? In the near future, I think that organizations, as an immediate step, if you're thinking about this area and you don't know where to start, I would say start with the small things. Start with your continuous improvement. Start with empowering your people with tools and language and being consistent in those tools and language so that they can start to build up a comfort level with what you're doing and what you're trying to achieve. Right. So this is the number one thing that I would say avoid, and that is hopping from this to that, to this one over here, to that one. Every time you change your language, you risk disassociating your employees and making them feel disillusioned. You leave your employees feeling disillusioned with what you're trying to achieve. So choose a path, start on that path, course correct, make the changes small. If you have a huge transformation program and you want to start it today, beautiful. But if you're waiting 3 years to see change, where you are in 3 years is not going to be the same as where you are today. So make sure that you're doing some incremental change along the way, even if that comes down to improve the small processes, improve, this big thing that's messed up, rather than waiting for the new software system to be implemented.
Yeah, that's great. And for someone that's listening right now, that's listened to our conversation, and maybe this is the first time they've really started learning more about BPM, or what does BPM look like actually in practice, not just in theory, but how are organizations implementing BPM, and what's necessary to make sure it's a success? Where would you encourage that person to go now to learn more, to understand? I guess the internet can be sometimes overwhelming because there's a lot of different opinions and thoughts and things out there. And I guess the audience needs to be mindful. Well, where is my organization at? What do we need to work on first? But where would you encourage that person to go to learn more about process and how it can help their organization?
As you said, there are a lot of beautiful websites on the internet that have lots of information that you might find valuable. Six Sigma is one that I frequently refer to. I quite like Naidoo as a reference account, who is the author. That's the case with everything, isn't it? Even if you're looking at a beautiful white paper, that white paper is probably prepared by an organization that has a financial motive in mind.
Right.
When I come down to it, if you really want to learn about what best practices are that are happening out there, reach out to the peer networks. So there is one organization that I'm a member of. It's the AASP. And I will plug that because it's a not-for-profit. But we have a lot of activities and conversations in this space. And it's connecting people with people, building the conversations, bringing the expertise, and trying to do it in a fair and balanced way.
Yep.
Yeah, I think those are some of the resources that I would recommend.
That's great. That's awesome. Well, Stephanie, I just want to thank you for sitting down with me, because obviously in 30 minutes, we can only cover so much when it comes to the world of process and what there is. But as we were talking about before we got started, like as long as this conversation can spark questions, it can challenge mindset, it can get people thinking, I guess, about things that maybe they haven't considered before. Maybe they haven't seen the value in BPM, or they're still trying to understand, well, what are some of the key things I need to consider before we adopt a technology or things like that. So for the guys that are listening, I hope you've been taking notes. I've certainly been taking notes, and I've been learning a lot. It's been a very, very valuable conversation today. And I just want to thank you, Stephanie. It's been an absolute pleasure.
The pleasure's all mine, Daniel. Thank you so much for allowing me to join you. I'm very excited to be a part of Process Pioneers, and I'm looking forward to the next episode.